Down the Cam?
Yeah.
Did you commute down the Cam?
I commuted through King's College. That was my walk. So that was nice. So.
Wow.
All right, it is the appointed hour, so let's go ahead and get started. I will open us up in a word of prayer, and then we'll begin.
Should I close the door?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? It's
Noisy.
out there, which is a good sign. Yeah.
Good noisy.
Yes, it is. Father, we want to thank you for this time again that we have to gather together tonight. We are grateful to you for the opportunity to be here and ask your blessing upon our conversation, our thinking, our reflecting. We give this to you. Through Jesus Christ our Lord we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, you have your handouts. I realized after I printed them that I forgot to change from week 4 to week 5. So it is week 5 on there. So we have one more week. Next week we will finish up with the series that we've been doing this fall called Sabbath Church, the Church in Power in a Post-Christian World. Oops, I need to plug this in so I can control it from here. So you should be quite familiar for those who have been here. We have a couple of new faces. Welcome back from Texas, and welcome Audrey. Good to have you here with us tonight. We've been asking this question about what does it mean for us to follow Christ after Christendom. At the end of this period of time that has marked much of the history of the West, when the church and the state had a particular relationship of power and influence in the society. We no longer live with the assumptions of Christendom in the American culture in the Western world. And so we've been thinking about this question: how does the end of Christendom shape the way we think of the relationship between the church and the culture? When we aren't in the kind of position of power and influence that we have been in, how does that need to reshape the way that we think about what it means to follow Jesus in this time and in this place? So we've been thinking about the church's way of being in the post-Christian world. The relationship between the church and power has been a particular question that we've been thinking about. So we spent the first 3 weeks spending some time thinking about the concept of Sabbath and starting to think through what we did last fall with Sabbath politics, now thinking a little bit more broadly about Sabbath as a biblical concept that defines the way of the church as being in the world, how we are called to be God's people in the world, thinking about how Sabbath might give us bearings for what it means for us to live our life of discipleship in this time and in this place. Last week we dug into Sabbath economics, and we spent some time thinking about the relationship between the church and money by looking at the relationship between Jesus and money. And just a brief recap of that, we looked at a couple of passages where Jesus is asked about paying taxes. And in one of those passages, it's the famous line that we know so well: give to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God what is God's. And another time, Jesus was asked to pay the temple tax, and he said, I'm not under that law, but we don't want to offend anybody, so Peter, go out, throw out your net, pull up a fish, take the coins out of the mouth of the fish, and we'll go and we'll pay the taxes for that. And in both of those, kind of the point that we were driving at was, for Jesus, money remained money, and it never became mammon. Mammon is what happens when money becomes an object of our affection. Mammon is what happens when money becomes something that we trust in, rather than trusting in the Lord. So Jesus needed money, because to live a human life, we need resources. And so Jesus operated with money, his disciples operated with money. But for him, he had, I talked about it last week, what I called kind of a holy disrespect for money. That's not a flippancy with money, but that is a keeping money in its place, not allowing money to become an idol, not allowing money to become mammon, and that which is given over to our hearts. So what we're going to tackle tonight is technology, and the question of what do we do with technology, and thinking about not just the current technologies, but technologies that are in process right now that are the goal of which is to very much change the way that the world operates in ways that I think will make the technological advances of the last 100 years seem like child's play to the potential of technological advances that are going to take place in the next 100 years. And we're going to unpack that a little bit. I'm going to walk you through a book that I have been interacting with, and when I was in Chicago last week, I presented a paper on this kind of question about the church and technology and what's coming. But what I want to do before we dive into that, kind of the future and things that are being thought about, and then asking the question, how should the church, what is our relationship to technology? What should our relationship be to these kinds of technologies and the pursuits of technology that are coming? What I wanted to do tonight is start with the question, what is technology? And what I'm about to say, I said exactly the same thing. I just copied and pasted the slide from last week about money. Because one of the things I think is important, again, for us to recognize is that we are created beings. We are material beings created out of the dust of the earth. That is good. And so as created beings created out of the dust of the earth, we are created to live as material beings in a material world, which means that we need, by God's will, food, shelter, clothes, etc. That we need these things, that this is part of God's creation, purpose, and intention for us. That there are resources that are necessary that we call necessities, the necessities of life. We need shelter. We need food in order to sustain our life. And that's not something that arose because of our rebellion against God. That's part of who God created us to be. He created us to be material beings. So I want to fit technology within that and think about technology within the context of us being material beings, and also within the context of us being the image of God on earth and the stewards of God on earth. Technology comes from the Greek word techne. And techne means craftsmanship, craft, and art. So it has a bit of a broad sweep of what techne can mean. But craftsmanship, craft, and art. When God created humanity in Genesis chapter 1, he gives us a mission. Right? And the mission is to fill the earth and subdue it. And the word subdue there doesn't mean to wrestle it into submission, doesn't mean to abuse the earth. The word subdue there means to bring order to the earth. That God is a God who created an orderly universe, and when he created the earth, he put us upon the earth in his image to be those who would bring order to the earth. So the intention, I think, of Genesis chapter 1 is to show God's orderly creation of what he's doing on the first day, the second day, bringing order. And then, when he gets to the creation of humanity, he gives us a task, which is to be like him in bringing order to the earth. That he brought order to the heavens and the creation of the earth, and then he set us upon the earth in order to be his image bearers as those who bring order to the earth. So as those who are created in the image of God, we are called to use techne, craftsmanship, art. We are called to use these things in order to fulfill this mandate of being God's image bearers, of being those who bring order to the earth. Yes, Linda.
I was under the impression that when God created the earth that everything was in order. You mean to counteract the second law of the dynamics of things tend to fall apart?
No, so here's my understanding of that.
Okay.
My understanding of that is that God placed Adam and Eve in Eden, right? And their descendants were to take the order of Eden and fill the earth and bring the order of Eden out into the rest of the world, which was not ordered. Not chaotic, right? Not disordered, but not cultivated. Not brought under the order of God through his image, right? So the way I understand it is, Genesis 1:1, it talks about chaos there. It talks about the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters, and God is bringing order out of this. So my understanding of what's going on in Genesis 1 is that the rest of the earth is wild. Not evil, not disordered, but wild. And in order to sustain human life, we needed to spread out from there and subdue, bring order to the earth, so that our relationship with the earth would be a relationship of life-giving. Which I think is what's going on then in Genesis 3, is then the curse, that order that we were to bring through cultivation, through agriculture, through building, that now our relationship with the earth is quite different than what it would have been.
Because the earth is fighting back.
Because the earth is fighting back. Because the earth has become is affected by our rebellion against God, right?
The earth fell also.
Because of us, because we're not achieving our mandate, because we're not in right relationship with God and right relationship with neighbor, there's also, and I don't really fully grasp how this exactly takes place, but something happened to the relationship between humans and the earth, in which the earth now is going to bear thorns and thistles, and you're going to have to work by the sweat of your brow to get out of the earth what originally the labor of humanity would have to go in, but that would receive. That's how God would provide for human beings. Right? So I view what's going on in there is that God has planted this couple in Eden. The goal was not to stay hanging out in Eden. The goal was for the human race, as we are fruitful and multiply, to take the order of Eden and bring it out throughout all the earth. So I don't want to say that the earth was, the word I like is wild. It was wild. Not bad, but wild, not tamed to the purpose of being that which would sustain human life.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yes, but I'm having trouble understanding how human beings could bring order the way God did in the first verse.
Well, I think it's underneath him as his, we'll talk about this in a second, I think, as his, well, here in fact, let's jump to here. So I think technology then, within this story, right? Technology, as humans were to go out from Eden and bring order, and part of that is you develop techne, you develop craft, you develop art, you develop tools by which the cultivation happens. And technology is a part of God's creation mandate for human beings to create, to implement in order to bring the earth to its fullness. So our job as God's creators is to make the earth fruitful and full. And that's what the intent of God was for us and for our relationship to the earth.
Just the simple aura of clothing. You get further north, you're going to have to invent new ways of covering yourself.
Right. Yeah. That's why, part of why I was saying last week, I don't think that the clothing was just because of the fall. I think that there's an image that's going on in Genesis 1 about being naked and unashamed. But I think as humans spread out, you are to adapt to the world in which you live. And that means if you're going to have clothing, then you have to have looms. You have to have an artisanship that will be able to do that. Right? So we're called to bring order to the created world, to bring fruitfulness to the created world, and in this sense to be co-creators. Not on the level of God. He's the creator, capital C, creator. But as his image, he invites us into that creation process. He does that in the be fruitful part, right? God just doesn't say poof and there's a new baby, right? And just kind of, Each baby is created that way. There's a particular way babies are created, and we're invited into that creation process as those who are in the image of God. So in that sense, we are creators with God, but under
Some have a bigger part than others.
And some have a bigger part than others. That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I read something that the ancients didn't understand reproduction the way we now do.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
they thought
There
that
was
God
a-
was an active participant, a spark, a
Every time,
flame,
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, intercourse.
Right.
And,
There was. Yeah.
they had a very different.
Well, and they
I don't know if it's
certainly-
true or not, but
No,
I just read
that's,
this.
they didn't understand the biology. Of it all.
No, chromosomes and
Right.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. And you can certainly see in the scriptures. You can see in the Psalms about God's weaving together
Yeah,
the
knitting
baby in the
together.
womb, right? And God knowing the baby in the womb. So I think that you have some indication there of that mindset. And I don't think what we know scientifically negates that, but I certainly think that God has established biological processes by which he does his work. And that's true in the earth. I mean, crops don't just grow because God says poof, there are crops. There are processes by which this takes place that humans had to, I think, learn, and that's where technology fits in. It's in that learning process, that coming to understand process of how to engage with the earth in order to get from it that which is fruitful and that is necessary to sustain human life. And what happened after the fall is our relationship to the earth is very different than what it was to be prior to that. Yeah. So technology are means by which humans live out our mission to be God's image on earth. That technology is necessary for the human image-bearing task that we have been given. All right? So we invent tools. You have a problem, you have something you've got to figure out, you've got a process that you need to do, you got to cultivate a field, whatever it is, you invent tools. You figure out how to do that. And that's part of the God-given image that has been created upon the earth. Craftsmanship, to create items not just of beauty or utility, but both. That craftsmanship was deeply valued in a lot of these ancient cultures, and even I don't think we value craftsmanship nearly the way that we once did, because we mass produce everything and we plastic everything, and we don't have the same kind of value of craftsmanship. But that has certainly been part of human culture over time.
Which shows in the fact their names became synonymous with what they did.
What they did, yeah. So, and then God gave us minds to study and to understand how the earth works and what those processes are and how to engage with the earth to make it fruitful and to make our lives fruitful. I think all of that was God's original intent. And of course that continues on after the fall, after the rebellion. But again, it changes. And we've walked through that story quite a few times around Genesis 3, Genesis 4. So just to summarize a few things here. Fallen technology. Question, what happens to technology when it is divorced from the purpose intended by God? Which is really what we were effectively asking last week about money. What happens when money gets out of its lane in our hearts? What happens when technology gets divorced from the purposes that God intends, the purposes of the image of God engaging with the earth in order to bear fruit, in order to sustain human life? Or another way of putting it, to use our language that we've been using a bit over the last couple of years, what happens to technology in the hands of humanity east of Eden? Outside now of Eden, outside of God's intended purpose, what happens to technology? And what we see, what happens to technology, is the same thing that happens to money, and the same thing that happens to power, political power, the same thing that happens when fallen human hearts now apply themselves to life and are no longer under the Sabbath rule of God. We see this, again, going back to Cain. Technology is used for Cain to build a city for himself. You see this with Babel. Technology is used to build a tower to reach out for the heavens. Technology in the hands of rebellious humanity becomes a means of securing wealth for ourselves, protection for ourselves, prosperity for ourselves. And one of the things that we're seeing happening, exploding in our world, is technology becoming a source of meaning for ourselves. That I think this is one of the key shifts that has happened over the last 50 years. And I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. The technology has taken a place in human life in the last 50 years, and this is accelerating like crazy, in which meaning is being looked for in technology. Not a means towards a certain end, but technology becoming an end in itself. Technology becoming an idol. Technology becoming an object of worship. And one of the things that I think you see very clearly in early 21st century, particularly Western culture, is the idolatry of technology.
It seems like it kind of started with the race to be the first on the moon. Just like it was some technology idol.
Yeah.
And it was really closely tied with politics and power.
Nationalism and power and superiority. Yeah. And you can go back. You can go back to the the Industrial Revolution, the ability to mass produce weapons as technology started to be able to create things, some of which were very, very good. Right, like I'm really glad that they discovered penicillin, and I'm glad that we're not using leeches anymore to try to figure out, or knocking a hole in your head in order to cure your headache. But this is the shadow side of technology. For the good stuff that technology has done over the last couple hundred years, we've also figured out how to create atomic bombs.
Well, even more simplistically, we've gotten cars that we can get around in.
Yeah.
But look at the pollution.
But what does that do? Right.
To the cars and what we're doing to the atmosphere and what hurricanes did, and yet many people will just say it's a bunch of bunk. It's not real.
I think what's going on is you see whatever creations of as we accelerate our dependence upon technology, it's creating the need to figure out more technologies in order to offset those technologies. And so as you continue to pursue these technological advances, I think inevitably what happens, and this is what we're going to be looking at in a little bit, inevitably what happens with that is there's a promise that technology will solve all of our problems. And a lot of people are buying into that.
Yes.
A lot of people are buying into that, and very powerful people are buying into that.
Very powerful.
The shadow side of that is the history of technology is whatever technologies you invent to solve your problems, create a whole other set of problems for you. That then you have to create more technologies to offset those. And as you're doing that, you're becoming more and more dependent upon technology.
And further away from the earth that God.
And further away from the earth, yeah.
So let's all move back to the farm.
So there's a writer named Wendell Berry. Have you heard of Wendell Berry?
Yeah.
You guys heard of Wendell Berry? That's pretty much what Wendell Berry says.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And Wendell Berry, he's a poet. He's written some novels. He writes essays. He moved back to his home farm in Kentucky, and he's been writing about. He doesn't say everyone should live on the farm, but what he is arguing is for local economies, the importance of local economies, and what globalization is doing to all of this, how detrimental that is to the earth, and divorcing people from land and rootedness. And so he would argue a lot of the anxiety that we see in the world today is an anxiety that is rooted in a mobile, technologically driven, plastic society. Disconnected. Incredibly connected, and tremendously disconnected.
Not on a soul level.
Not on a soul level, right. Audrey, yeah. Sorry.
Doesn't it cause us to think that we are God? All of these
That's exactly where we're going here
Okay.
in just a minute. So, yeah, that's exactly where we're going. Yes, yeah.
Well,
Doug, what were you going to say?
Was in the first place.
Yeah.
Talking about farms, it used to be that farming communities had many occupations, and
Yeah.
it took more people to plow a field with a horse. I mean, you'd have to feed the horse oats, so it had to be somebody.
Yeah.
But
There's
now
that.
these rural towns are
Drying up.
drying up, and it is sort of, it's sad. People,
Yeah.
cities are attractive and
Yeah.
pleasant and have a lot to offer, but it's sad to see.
Yeah.
And business of John Deere tractors, that sounds like such a American great thing,
Right.
but
Right.
farmers used to do their own technological repair work on John Deere tractors.
Right.
Now, you call somebody who
It's got a computer.
who plugs in their computer
Yeah.
to your John Deere tractor
Yeah.
in the field while you're using it to repair it, and in the contract, it says you cannot fix this yourself, you're not allowed to.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Which
it
means-
voids all your warranties because
Yeah.
you can't.
Which means you don't really own it.
Right.
You, because you need permission from somebody else
Yeah.
to change the spark plug.
Yeah. I'm not a Marxist. Just make that clear before I say this next statement. Right? I'm not a Marxist. But this idea of the divorcing of the working people from the means of production, that is a very Marxist idea about whoever owns the means of production is the one who has the power. You're seeing that not just but like that kind of a thing. You see that ownership and that divorcing of the ability because of how it's computerized and how technical it is. That the farmer can't get under the hood and fix it. And there's a divorce in the means of production there. There's a control that someone else has over the process that removes it, even in farming, from being just a local process. So there's some, these are, well, let's dive into this. What I want to do now is spend some time talking to you about a book called Homo Deus, which now to Audrey's point, Homo Deus means divine human. And this is a book that came out earlier this year by a man named Yuval Noah Harari. Harari is an atheist, Jewish professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he teaches history there. And he's written 2 books that have come out over the last couple years. The first one was called Sapiens. It's called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, going back from, 4 billion years ago in his teaching of it, but mostly 200,000 years ago when in an evolutionary perspective, when Homo sapiens appeared on the scene 200,000 years ago. So he's tracing that story up till now. And then Homo Deus, it's called A Brief History of Tomorrow. And it's his looking out to where are we going, right? Where are we going? And again, he's writing it from an evolutionary process. And so as we'll see in a second here, his assumption and the assumption of many technologists today is that evolution continues, but now we have the opportunity through technology to take some control over the evolutionary process and guide where we want to go into the future. Okay? And so what I want to do here tonight is not kind of necessarily spend a whole lot of time evaluating the theology of someone like Harari, who is an atheist evolutionist, who probably, I would hope, most of us don't necessarily agree with his theological perspective. What I want to do tonight is describe what people who don't believe what you and I believe are doing. Not going to do, but doing. So what we're going to be talking about here is not science fiction. This is what scientific endeavors, technological endeavors, and a ton of money is going towards this pursuit of what Deus calls the next stage of humanity, Homo Deus. What Harari calls the next stage, Homo Deus. So in other words, what he's saying is we've been living as Homo sapiens now for the past 200,000 years. And now we're moving towards, pointing towards pursuing the next evolutionary stage, which is no longer to be Homo sapiens, but now to be Homo Deus. And so in this book, he describes what he calls the new human agenda. But before we get to that, let's just sort of talk through how he's thinking about this. So as he's writing this, he's looking at the revolutions that have taken place in the history of Homo sapiens, of human beings. The first is what is called the cognitive revolution. That evolutionists would say, and again, I don't want here to get into what we believe about evolution. This is what people who are evolutionists, this is what they declare is the case based on their science, right? The cognitive revolution took place about 70,000 BC. The cognitive revolution was when something, and they don't know what, as they look at this scientifically and look at the record, something happened where Homo sapiens moved into a different kind of cognitive ability than the world around them. No, and in fact, the science very much now, and evolutionists would believe this, that humanity didn't come from monkeys. That you look at the evolutionary tree, that somewhere way back, millions ago, there was a split. And it wasn't that monkeys evolved, and then apes evolved, and then humans evolved, but we've been evolving alongside of each other. So there's not really that Darwinian idea of monkeys and apes evolved into humanity. There was a primate tree that back a couple million years ago branched, and the human primate tree has been evolving, and the monkey primate tree has been evolving, but it's not the way that Darwin would have told the story, from monkeys to apes to humans. That's pretty well settled in the science now that that's not what happened, right? But somewhere, as we were going from, you have these different species of humanity in the past, right? That would be seen not as the monkey side, but the human side, where you would have had Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, right? Neanderthal people. And then somewhere in that story, around 70,000, Homo sapiens, something happened in the mind of the Homo sapiens where cognition came in a new way. And that created a different way for Homo sapiens to live beyond anyone else. And the idea in the evolutionary story is that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals existed at the same time over a period of time. Because if you look in the genetic record of Homo sapiens, you can actually trace back some of the genetic DNA within us to Neanderthals. Okay? So that there was some crossbreeding in this story that happened. Okay? So, yes, Rob.
I'm probably the oldest one here, so I will admit crass ignorance, and nobody else has to. Sapiens.
Yeah.
Tell me what sapiens.
Us.
Well, Homo sapiens are us, but I mean, what are the words? And Deus is God.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Translate to English. Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens.
Sapiens. That comes from the word for wisdom.
Wisdom.
Right. So this is what's a distinctive marker of Homo sapiens is this capacity for thought.
Why?
Sapientia is the word for the Latin word for wisdom.
Okay.
Right. So that this is what defines human beings.
Right. Okay.
As we have a capacity for thought, cognition, consciousness, reflection that no one else does, including some of the precursors to Homo sapiens, Homo Neanderthals, Homo erectus, and some of the other species.
Gracias, entiendo.
Yes.
So the opposable thumb was before that?
I don't know exactly, but I think so. I think so. Yeah, I think that development would have been the case in earlier Homo species. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the cognitive revolution. About 12,000 was the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution was when Homo sapiens figured out how to plant and farm, and so no longer being nomadic, no longer being hunters and gatherers following the herds. Now we became settled and domesticated animals. Prior to 12,000, you don't have the domestication of animals in the record. After that, you have the domestication of animals. So that's the agricultural revolution. The scientific revolution happens around 1500 AD, where Homo sapiens starts to really think in a very different way about how the world works and how to understand how the world works and how to get control over how the world works and the processes of the world. So what Harari argues in this book is that we are now at the edge, right on the edge of another massive revolution in human history, right? 70,000, 12,000, 1,500, 2,000 now, that we're at the edge of and we're entering into and in the first stages of this technological revolution, which the promise of it is that it will very much change the way that Homo sapiens function, and in fact change the nature of Homo sapiens. Promise here is that we can take control of history by taking control of the evolutionary process. So this is my phrasing of this: the move from biological evolution to technological evolution. And a quote from Harari, just to sum this up: "For 4 billion years, natural selection has been tweaking and tinkering with bodies, so that we've gone from amoeba to reptiles to mammals to sapiens. Yet there is no reason to think that sapiens is the last station." If you're an evolutionist, and if you're a materialist evolutionist, and you believe that the evolutionary process has been going on for 4 billion years, then why on earth do you think it's done? Right? Why would you think that process is over? And the people who are the leaders of technology who hold to this kind of a view don't think that it's over, but certainly aren't going to be patient enough to wait for something as slow as natural selection to do its job, because now we can do it. Now we can create ourselves to be what we want to be, right? Now we can use technology that we have discovered to bring a sense of power and control over the evolutionary process in order to guide evolution in the direction that we want to take it.
That's scary. Who is the we?
Well, Harari is one. But I want to say, too, there are a lot at Google. I mean, Google is investing a ton of money in solving aging. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But there are all kinds of what they call shadow corporations that have been pumped full of money, who don't need to do any kind of advertising, who don't need to have any kind of a public presence, that are working on some of these key problems that are facing the things that threaten us as Homo sapiens that we need to fix in order to secure for us the life that we want.
Making new organs.
Making new organs, genetic engineering, biochemistry stuff, all of this kind of stuff. Yep.
Something you said reminded me of people wanting to choose what kind of baby they have.
Yeah.
And was it the Japanese that said you can, or Chinese, that only have one child?
Yeah, the
And
Chinese is the
realized
one child
that
policy.
didn't work out so well because
Right.
they wanted
It's been-
males and then there weren't enough females to propagate the species.
Yeah.
So can't people see that when you rely
So
on your own thinking?
There are people.
No, I can't.
There are certainly people who are raising all of these ethical questions and all of these questions around, do we really want to do this? Hey, people, do we really know what we're doing? One of them, there's a book, it's called Our Final Invention by a guy named James Barrett, and he's talking about artificial intelligence. And he's basically saying, if we pursue artificial intelligence, where artificial intelligence becomes thousands of times smarter than us, we have no idea what that's going to do.
Right.
We can try to envision it, but how can you envision something that's something 1,000 times smarter than us is going to do? We don't have the capacity to envision that. By nature, we can't envision that because we're only this smart, and this thing is going to be thousands of times smarter than we are. So what do we do, right? And so this is one of the questions, and Harari has this in his book, talking about the people who are saying we need to pump the brakes. And his response to that basically is, there is no such thing as the brakes. Because
Yes, there is.
there is so much at stake. There's so much money at stake. There's so much military technology at stake. The military is trying to master AI. But I can guarantee you that the United States military isn't the only military trying to master AI. Because whoever gets AI figured out, it's like the space race, right? It's the AI race. Who's going to be the first to do this? Who's going to be the first to master this? So that we can have AI figuring out war strategies for us, and not glitchy human beings who have the capacity of Homo sapiens, but not the capacity of an artificial intelligence. So I would love to think that humanity could all come together and say, hey, maybe this isn't such a bad idea. I personally don't have the confidence in humanity to be able to make that kind of a call.
We can't even agree on the national anthem.
We can't do there's a whole lot we can't do. There's a whole lot that we can't do. But there are people who are waving these flags out there, and they're saying, we don't really know where this path is going. We don't know what the result of this is going to be. There's a whole lot of other people who are running full steam ahead. So say you get 90% of the people to agree, we're not going to do this. Well, the other 10% are, and they'll figure it out.
That's why we have the atomic bomb, we blow it up.
Exactly. There you go.
What's AI?
Artificial intelligence. Sorry, yeah, artificial intelligence. So IBM is actually working on this project now to retro-engineer the human brain in a computer. So kind of starting with the human brain, the capacities of the human brain, to mimic that in a computer. And so there's different levels of AI. There's artificial intelligence, which is what we have now. We have artificial intelligence. We have it in our cars. Analog braking is artificial intelligence, right? My intelligence isn't fast enough to hit the brake when my car is zooming up to a car in front of me that's hit their brake. But my car's intelligence is fast enough. It can react faster than I can. That helped me the other day when my car started beeping at me and I was able to hit the brakes, right? I was grateful for that artificial intelligence. The next stage is that they haven't gotten figured out yet. It's called artificial general intelligence, and that's when a computer will be able to mimic the human brain. And there are predictions on that being 10 years out. Right? And then the next stage is what's called artificial superintelligence, and that's where you see an exponential move of what computers will be able to do compared to the human brain.
And then at that point, we hope we have good leadership in the country to lead a civilized dialogue rather than what we have going on now.
Right.
That will be very interesting. But who's going to lead the dialogue with the computer?
Well, before the computer gets there, they better stop.
Yes. The problem is, here really is the problem. The problem is that nations, technology companies are supranational.
Yep.
Nations aren't really the powers that be anymore. Google and Apple and these shadow companies, these are the powers that be. That the nations are serving. But we're already living in a world in which the nation state doesn't operate with the power that it did, because now corporations are operating with that power. So who's having these conversations? There's not an entity. There's not the United Nations can get nations talking to each other, but who's getting Google and Apple and Calico Systems and IBM?
Even medical technology.
Right.
Who's talking about what we should be doing
And what we shouldn't be doing, right?
You know, and a lot of those conversations people don't want to enter because they're very difficult.
They're very difficult. And by what standard do you make these ethical decisions?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. All right. Let's keep moving on. So what's next? Well, Homo Deus is how Harari describes this. This next stage of human life in this technologically advanced world. So what is the future for humanity as envisioned by the pursuit of Homo Deus? What again, what Harari does in his book is he talks about the new human agenda, and he contrasts that to the old human agenda. The agenda for Homo sapiens for the past 200,000 years has been to survive, basically, right? It was, as Thomas Hobbes said, that for most of human history, life has been nasty, brutish, and short. That's what most people have experienced. That life has been nasty, brutish, and short. Threatened by war, threatened by plagues, and threatened by famine. These were the three great threats that have been the threats to Homo sapiens. What Harari says is that we've largely figured these things out. Now, that might sound a little surprising to us, but I'm not going to bore you with statistics. If you want to read his book or look at the book, I would encourage you to do that. But in his book, he looks at what plagues do today, right? So a few years ago, the Ebola virus broke out, right? And there was a worldwide concern about the Ebola virus. You know how many people died in that breakout of the Ebola virus? 11,000. Okay. The Spanish flu in 1918, 20 million. So when you look at the statistics, plagues are still around, but the kinds of advances that science has made medically has made it very unlikely that 20 million people will die in an outbreak. Now, there are people who would argue, well, that's not true, because the super viruses are developing and things are becoming. So I'm not quite as optimistic as Harari is to say we figured out plagues. But certainly statistically, you can see that the way that science has developed, the kinds of things that your and my parents and grandparents faced are not the kind of things that we face today. Plagues can be cured. War can be contained. Again, I think we have I would have some questions of that, particularly with nuclear war and what we could do. So I'm not quite as optimistic. But famines today are primarily, he says, political famines, right? The reason that people starve to death today is mostly political, not because of actual famines. The food is there, it's just you can't get it to people for political reasons. Right? So there are these political famines. So his idea is that we've largely solved the old human agenda. I'm not quite as optimistic as he is, but I think his point is that they don't have the kind of dominance that they would have had for people who were living 100 years ago plus, right? And certainly 1,000 years ago. There are things that have been done to curb these things, which he then argues means that now we can have time to start working on the new human agenda. And the new human agenda has 3 items on it. The first item is immortality, which actually is more amortality. The idea here is if we solve some of the key diseases that tend to kill human beings, we could still die if a piano falls on us. But there are things that are being pursued that would dramatically slow or stop the aging process. Technological innovations that seek to, quote unquote, solve death.
So then we're going to overpopulate the world.
Yeah.
So this is always,
that's
absolutely, this is always the question, right? Is, okay, say we do this, what's the effect? What's the technological effect of this? But there is a group called Calico that is a research lab in California that has been funded billions of dollars by Google, and this is their goal, is to solve death. This is what they are after, right? And they're doing this with the belief, and this is what you see in a lot of this discussion, technological discussion around the human body. is that, using computer terms, the human body is glitchy. Why do we die? We die because of some technical glitch in our bodies. And so what if we could solve the technical glitches?
Well, that's the idea that they're using cells
Correct.
to overtake disease within your own body.
Yes.
As a cure for diseases, which is proving to be.
It is solving diseases.
Yeah.
It is very much. There are things that have already happened that are curing diseases, and they're, I think, getting a better handle on some of these, especially with genetic research. We'll talk about that in just a second. People die because of glitches in the body. What if we can fix the glitches? And one of the key areas of technology here is called nanotechnology. This is technology at the atomic level. This is technology at the level of atomic materiality. But medical nanotechnology, which Beth, I think, is part of what you're referring to there, that's technology on the cellular level. And part of the advances in medicine over the past 10 to 15 years, particularly as the genome has been mapped, the advances of what's going on with preventative medicine at the cellular level, this is getting a huge amount of attention medically. So let's think about this. What if you could go to your doctor, and your doctor could inject into you thousands of little tiny robots. And those little tiny robots will swim around in your bloodstream, and they will look for bad things in your bloodstream. And they'll find those bad things in your bloodstream, and they'll kill those bad things before they become really bad things. Right? So they will find anomalous cells, cancerous cells, and they'll kill those before they can multiply. They'll be on a continual search throughout your body for these cells that could cause cancer, for cancerous cells. We all have cancerous cells within us. In some people they multiply, in some people they don't. They're all there. So what if we could inject them, they find them, they deal with them?
You know,
They swim.
conceptually, that's just an extension of getting an inoculation. I'm sure that as they came into being, people thought, but you're going to inject these dead germs, and there's still people that are afraid they're going to get the flu from a flu shot.
I'm one of those. The only time I ever get a flu is when I get a flu shot. But hey, that's just me. But yes, so in that, now this then is, all right, this is the question is, at what point do you cross some kind of a line into something now that is inconsistent with technology as something intended by God, to something which seeks to leverage technology in order to move us to being God? I think that's one of the really fundamental questions that the church in the next generation is going to have to really wrestle with. Is at what point do we say no to technologies? Right? Because they're inconsistent with our calling. Because they're inconsistent with our being humans created in the image of God. Because they're inconsistent with our theology of death. Those are some questions I think that are going to be really, I'll use the word fascinating, for the next generation, for my kids. I think about this a lot with my kids. I think about what the decisions my kids are going to have to make with regard to technology. Right now, I'm trying to keep them away from smartphones and iPads, right? While I am constantly modeling being on my smartphone, which is right. So I fully take my hypocrisy and admit it there. But
Like you're a big boy.
yeah, exactly. Well, theoretically.
He's a grown up.
Yeah, right. But they're going to have to face some questions. Their kids are going to have to face questions that I don't even know that we fully grasp what those are going to be for them.
Joel, why wouldn't my body reject a nanorobot? injecting?
I don't know the answer to that exactly. I'm not well enough versed in the medicine
You
side
haven't
of
done
this.
yet, right?
Not at any kind of a widespread level.
But they've done very similar stuff to it.
They have
because
done some
they've
tests.
injected stuff into people
Yeah,
that
yeah.
allowed their cells to attack
Yes.
cancer and stuff,
Yeah.
and have been highly successful.
And that's been biological cells attacking other cells. This is kind of that next step of
Yeah.
a foreign, a robot. I mean, literally, it's a robot that would be injected into the body. And again, I want to say, this isn't science fiction. This is being worked on right now in Silicon Valley. They're working on this.
That's why I understand, that's what I have to attack my cancer was.
You did the immunotherapy.
Immune therapy.
Yeah, which is
exactly that,
a
right?
different advance in that process. And so again, there's the question of, all right, immunotherapy. Is there an ethical question there?
Where do you start trying?
What about from that to robots, to nanotechnology? Now, let's just, again, look at this. Well, we're not just talking about diseases here, we're also talking about aging. That what science has discovered is that aging is a product of the breakdown of cells. What if you can constantly be repairing those cells so that your cells don't break down? And the aging process is dramatically slowed, if not what some people would aim at, solved. And then this starts to raise all kinds of really interesting questions. Say we can, let's just say we can get the average age of humanity up to 150. Okay, let's say that. And that is something that, there are people today who say that the first person who will live to 150 is alive. Right now, yeah. That we're close enough to figuring out that. Now, where you go from 150 and up, I don't know, but that's being discussed. So then that raises some questions, like, what's retirement age? When people can live to 150, what does this do to the job market? What does this do to the economic structure that we have lived with?
The Social Security.
The Social Security, to retirement, to marriage. Okay, if you get married at 25, are you supposed to stay married for 125 years? What does this do to a theology of marriage? My answer is yes, absolutely. But
how do you, Joel, how do you in today's day and age get people to have civil conversations about these things versus what is going on?
I don't know.
You know,
I have no idea. We don't have the capacity to have civil conversations today.
yeah, and that's the part that's so scary to
Yeah,
me, is
yeah.
not being able, you know, they are scary things, but the dialogue has to get much more civil than it is now, because people wouldn't dare.
But I think here's the thing that's scary to me, is even we get 95% of the people into the civil conversation, and that other 5% they opt out, and they're going to do what they're going to do because they have the money and they have the desire for immortality, and they solve it. What then happens? Right? What then happens if somebody solves it? What Harari says is one of the things that we could be facing is, right, at 12,000, you had the agricultural revolution, right? Domestication of animals. What he says is there's going to be a time, if some of this comes to happen, that at some point out here, you're gonna have this. You're gonna have a split between Deus and Sapiens. Because not all 8 billion people who live on the earth are at once going to be injected with nanotechnology. Who's going to do this? The rich people are going to be able to do this, right? The divide between rich and poor, which right now is economic, and medical. There is a medical divide, right? What you and I have available to us, people when I was in Kenya at Tenwick Hospital this past August, they're dying of stuff that you and I can get taken care of in a day or two. But as this starts to expand, he's saying one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, What is the relationship between this and this? And he's suggesting it could very well be akin to domestication. That Homo sapiens become the domesticated animals of Homo Deus. Yeah. Right.
And who domesticates us?
The powerful people, right? The people who have a capacity for thought that Homo sapiens don't have. The people who have figured out how to do these things.
It sounds like a different
1%.
version of the same old story.
It is, but it's the continuing story of humanity and our rebellion against God, seeking being divine. But it appears to me that there's something, the stakes of this are significant as you move out here, in some of these potentials out here. Rick?
Joel, it seems like there's a distinct parallel between last fall's Sabbath politics and your conclusion, if you remember from your very last session, that we'd be ambivalent about politics.
Right.
And that, I mean, maybe this is something that we are ambivalent about because it's not within the realm of the things that are our goals.
Right. Look, we're gonna get to that as I conclude.
So
but I want to kind of
why
get through.
get excited about it?
Well, so I think one of the reasons we need to get excited, I feel like we need to get excited about it is, so one of the questions I ask myself as I've been reading on this, as I've been reading books on technology, is pastorally, what is it that I need to do? What is it that we need to do as the church to prepare ourselves and prepare our kids for what does it mean to follow Jesus in this pursuit? At what point do you say, I'm not going to opt into that technology, even though it could make me a second-class citizen? I'm not going to opt into that, even though it could mean that I'm going to die of something that other people have solved, and I'm going to choose that. How do we make those decisions? What are the discipleship questions we need to be asking for ourselves? But I think about what am I going to do to help the generation that's coming behind me who are going to be in the thick of this? So that for me is part of the question is, I think in my personal conclusions, there are things that are happening in this technology world that I'm going to have to say no. To follow Jesus, I can't do that. But not everybody in every church is going to make that decision. And so what is that conversation like for the church to figure out what is our mission? What does it mean to follow Jesus? And how then do we relate to technology?
And again, isn't it analogous to the problem that we have right now with politics? I mean, how have we prepared the church to have this duality?
Right. The citizenship of heaven and the citizenship of
yeah,
earth.
I mean,
there are assumptions that we have lived with over time that I think the end of Christendom is forcing us to rethink all of those assumptions. And I think technology is a big one of these. The paper I wrote for that conference last week talked about the driver of this, and we'll maybe touch on this. We're starting around out of time, and I don't want to rush through this, so we may just pick up next week so that we can give this the attention that I think it deserves. But one of the things I think that the church has in unconscious ways, some of the tenets of humanism that are driving this. Some of the tenets of humanism and how that's played itself out in some of the political theories of liberalism that have come into the church. I think we have to do some thinking about our relationship to these ideologies and how they may not be helping us to get to the place where we're going to need to be in order to make the decisions that we need to make about technology. And I'll unpack that a little bit more next week. Doug, yeah.
When you use the phrase, the first person to live to the age of 150 is already walking among us,
Yeah.
it reminds me of the opening line in a P.D. James novel, Children of Men. The opening line is, the last person born on the earth was killed yesterday in a bar fight in Buenos Aires. Which you think, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But women have become infertile.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
sort of, but a lot of the things are similar, like domestication.
Right.
And
right.
Euthanasia and,
Yeah.
and an aging population
Yeah.
where nobody has young people anymore. There are no babies.
Right.
But
right.
you familiar with this?
I know that line. I haven't read that book, but I know that. That's one of the great opening lines of
that
of
is
a
why
novel.
it is. It's, you think,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is she talking about?
Yeah. That's a good way to set
It's
up
a
your
great
interest.
opening line, but
yeah.
your line reminded me so much
yeah.
of that.
Yeah. So let me finish out the last two items on the human agenda, then we'll call it a night and we'll pick this up next week. The next one is happiness. Right? So immortality, now we got to figure out how to solve the problem of happiness, to make ourselves to be able to be happy. Because the pursuit of happiness, that's a core tenet of humanism, a core tenet of liberalism. Therefore, if the pursuit of happiness is what we're about, if we define that as the core goal, one of the core goals of being human is to be happy, then what do we need to do? Well, we need to eliminate that which makes us unhappy. We need to get rid of those things that make us unhappy. Well, how do we do that? Well, one of the things we've already talked about, we solve aging. But another thing is our biochemical processes are glitchy. And so we need to fix the biochemical imbalances in the body that lead to unhappiness. Now we already do this now. We have drugs that we can take for depression. We have drugs that we can take to sort out some of our biochemical imbalances. But again, the question is, what if it's not just a matter of taking drugs, but solving that? What if we can get to the place where we solve it so that our biochemical processes never get out of whack? And so people are pursuing this as a goal of figuring out how to fix our biochemical problems, our biochemical glitches, in order to live in a state of perpetual happiness with those biochemical reactions fixed. Another avenue in this is VR, which stands for virtual reality. You don't like your reality? It's making you unhappy? Live in a virtual reality.
Right.
You want to go and surf in Hawaii this morning and then go stand on the Great Wall of China this afternoon? Immerse yourself in a virtual reality program, and you can do that.
Holodeck.
You got hologram kind of stuff. There's a novel that is called Ready Player One, and it's set in 2050. And there's a company called Oasis that has created a virtual reality system, and it's the story of a guy who. Now it's a long story, but anyway, it's basically about immersing yourself and living in a virtual reality system, and plugging in and being able to live your life in this virtual reality. Because who's to say that what we declare as reality is real? Why would we limit ourselves to that? That's very limiting. And what technology can do for us, the promise is it can expand our options. And it can open us up into new experiences. So this physical realm in which we live, why would we assume that that's the only reality? Why would we assume that that's the real reality when we can manufacture better realities? So let's manufacture those better realities. Now, of course, I think we would have to stop here and ask, well, if someone's continually plugged into a virtual reality, are they really going to find happiness? But then that leads to some fun philosophical questions about what is happy. What does that mean? And is sadness necessary for happiness? How do we understand that? Okay. And then the third is divinity. And what Harari means by divinity here kind of encompasses the first two. But what he would say as an atheist is that for pretty much all of the history of Homo sapiens up to the last couple hundred years, the predominant belief was that there was a god or gods who were ruling over history. There was a god or gods who were sovereignly directing history, or at least were heavily involved in the fates of humanity. What he's saying is, now that we have discovered that there is no god or gods, then what ought we to do? We ought to step into that role and take responsibility for us sovereignly guiding history. Because in this telling, there is no god or gods who are doing that. So humans need to step into that role. And let me just, this quote, and then we'll finish in just a second. Scientists will create new godlings who might be as different from us sapiens as we are from Homo erectus. And again, this kind of idea. Now, I can stop and read all of this theologically and wonder, would the God who we all believe and trust in, would God allow this to happen? Will God return? Will Jesus return before we're allowed to do this? Like, one of the things that we see in the scriptures is that God constrains evil. And so I think this is a very important theological question. But again, what I want to stress is, I might think that, and you might think that, and we may come to that conclusion, but the people who are driving this don't think that. So they're pursuing this. They are working on this. What God does to stop this, if God stopped this, I don't know. I can't predict the future. Theologically, I don't know what to do with the next stage of humanity beyond Homo sapiens. How does that fit into the biblical story? I haven't quite wrapped my mind around that yet. But what I want to just be very clear about is, whatever we think about this theologically, it doesn't matter to the people who are trying to figure this out. And if God does not step in, like he did at Babel, step in and thwart human pursuits of divinity, this process is going to be being pursued. And I think our responsibility as the church is to understand it, is to get ready for it, because we don't know what God's plans are, and is to discern together what it would mean to follow Jesus in a world that is being driven by this technological pursuit, and what it would look like for us to be training followers of Jesus to reflect together on what it means to truly be a disciple in a very different kind of reality than the one that we have been living in. And it's time to call it a night. I'll pick it up here. We'll pick it up here next week and finish this out, and then move on to finish out some things. But so I want to go ahead and leave it there. I'll go ahead and pray. And again, happy to hang out and chat with whoever wants to do so. Father, we give you thanks for this time. We pray your blessing upon it. We ask God for your wisdom and understanding and your guidance in what it means for us to be the church that rests in you while the world around us is not restful and is pursuing all kinds of things, seeking to protect themselves, seeking to secure life. I pray, God, that you would teach us how to live with the recognition that our life is secured in you, that it's not up to us to secure it, and how we then are to live as those who reflect your sovereignty and your character. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Joel, how about if we pray for a worldwide revival?
That's another good option.
Convert all those people.
So we could be.
I'm all for that.
Another
I'm all for that.
form of Amish?
Hey, Joel, are you
Yes.
familiar with chapter